Hannibal's ox torches. When you are trapped in a valley surrounded by Rome's finest legions, sometimes the best way out is a direct distraction. In 217 BC, during the Second Punic War, the Carthaginian general Hannibal Barca found himself cornered by Fabius Maximus in the valley of Ager Falernus. The Romans blocked all the mountain passes, intending to starve the Carthaginians out. Hannibal ordered his men to gather 2,000 oxen from their captured supplies. His troops tied bundles of dry pine and brush to the horns of the cattle. In the dead of night, they lit the brush on fire and drove the terrified oxen up a ridge away from the main pass. The Romans watching from the heights saw hundreds of lights moving frantically through the woods. Believing Hannibal's army was attempting a desperate mountain breakout, the Roman blocking forces abandoned their positions at the main pass and rushed toward the lights. Hannibal's entire army then quietly packed their gear, marched through the now unprotected valley floor, and escaped without losing a single man. George Washington's foggy evacuation, 1776. During the Battle of Long Island in August 1776, the American Revolution almost ended before it truly began. George Washington and his Continental Army were completely outmaneuvered and pinned against the East River by a massive British army. The British fleet was preparing to sail up the river to cut off any retreat, which would leave Washington with two choices: surrender or face total annihilation. Washington ordered his men to gather every flat-bottomed boat, fishing vessel, and rowboat they could find. Under the cover of darkness, a regiment of experienced sailors from Massachusetts began rowing the 9,000-man army across the mile-wide river to Manhattan. The evacuation took all night, but as dawn broke, a large portion of the army was still trapped on the beach. Right as the sun began to rise, an incredibly dense, unnatural fog rolled over the river, completely blinding the British lookouts. The rowing continued in total secrecy until the very last boat slipped away. When the fog finally cleared, the British advanced on the empty American fortifications, finding absolutely no one left. Napoleon's Great Escape from Elba, 1815. After his disastrous invasion of Russia, the European powers forced the Emperor Napoleon Bonaparte to abdicate his throne and exiled him to Elba, a tiny island off the coast of Italy. To ensure he stayed there, British and French royalist warships patrolled the waters constantly, keeping the island under a strict naval blockade. Napoleon spent 10 months plotting his move. On February 26, 1815, while the British naval commissioner was away in Italy for medical treatment, Napoleon took advantage of a gap in the patrol schedule. He quietly boarded a small brig named Inconstant, which had been secretly painted to look like a British merchant ship, along with a tiny force of 1,000 loyal soldiers. They slipped past two royalist patrol ships in the dark. To avoid suspicion, when a French Navy ship sailed close enough to hail them, Napoleon's crew casually yelled back through a megaphone that the emperor was doing perfectly well on Elba. He landed on the French coast 3 days later, causing the French troops sent to arrest him to immediately defect back to his side. Douglas MacArthur's PT boat run. In March 1942, the Japanese military had completely cut off American and Filipino forces on the Bataan Peninsula and the island fortress of Corregidor. General Douglas MacArthur, commander of the U.S. Army forces in the Far East, was ordered directly by President Roosevelt to escape to Australia before he was captured. The problem was that the Japanese completely controlled the surrounding seas and skies. Rather than risking a submarine, MacArthur decided to gamble on 4 small wooden PT boats, commanded by Lieutenant John D. Bulkley. The boats were heavily overloaded, carrying MacArthur, his family, and his staff through some of the most heavily patrolled waters of the Pacific. The small fleet traveled strictly at night, battling massive 15-foot waves that caused severe seasickness and threatened to break the wooden hulls apart. They hid their boats under camouflage netting near remote islands during the day to avoid Japanese aircraft scouts. After 2 grueling nights and covering over 560 miles of open ocean, the PT boats successfully reached the island of Mindanao, where MacArthur boarded a B-17 bomber to complete his escape to Australia. The evacuation of Dunkirk. In May 1940, the German blitzkrieg swept through France, cutting off and pinning approximately 400,000 British and French soldiers against the beaches of Dunkirk. With their backs to the English Channel and German panzers closing in, British military planners estimated they would only have time to save 45,000 men before the pocket collapsed. The primary issue was that the water near the beach was too shallow for large Royal Naval destroyers to get close enough to load the troops. The British government made a desperate move, requisitioning a fleet of about 850 civilian little ships, including private motor yachts, commercial fishing trawlers, and lifeboats. Because these boats had shallow drafts, they could sail directly up to the wet sand. While Luftwaffe bombers constantly attacked the beaches, these civilian vessels shuttled back and forth, picking up soldiers from the shallow surf and carrying them to deeper waters where larger naval destroyers were waiting. By June 4th, they had successfully rescued over 338,000 soldiers. Xenophon's March of the 10,000. In 401 BC, a force of 10,000 elite Greek mercenary soldiers was hired by Cyrus the Younger to help overthrow his brother, the king of Persia. However, Cyrus was killed early in the battle, leaving the Greeks stranded deep in Mesopotamia with no employer and a highly angry Persian army surrounding them. To make things worse, the Persian satrap invited the Greek generals to a peace banquet and promptly executed them all. Instead of surrendering, the Greeks elected new leaders, including a young writer and soldier named Xenophon. They began a grueling 2,000-mile march north toward the Black Sea. They had to fight off constant Persian cavalry raids, survive freezing mountain passes in Armenia, and forage for food while hostile local tribes rolled boulders down on them. After months of walking, the vanguard finally climbed a mountain ridge, saw the water, and shouted the famous words, "Thalata, Thalata, the sea." More than 3/4 of the army survived the march back to Greece. The HMS Amethyst run. In April 1949, during the Chinese Civil War, the British frigate HMS Amethyst was ordered up the Yangtze River to protect the British embassy in Nanjing. While on its way, Chinese communist artillery batteries opened fire, severely damaging the ship, killing 17 crew members and forcing it aground. 3 British rescue warships tried to sail upriver to help, but they were all battered by heavy artillery and forced to turn back, leaving the Amethyst trapped 104 miles inland under a 101-day siege. With fuel and food supplies dwindling, Lieutenant Commander John Cairns decided on a suicidal gamble. Under the cover of a pitch-black night on July 30th, the crew wrapped the anchor chains in canvas to muffle the sound and let the ship drift downstream. When the shore batteries finally spotted them, a massive firefight broke out. The Amethyst ran the gauntlet at full speed, navigating sandbars without a pilot and using a passing civilian passenger ship as a shield to block the searchlights. They successfully broke out into the open sea, sending the famous telegram back to London, "Have rejoined the fleet." The Battle of Chosin Reservoir breakout. During the brutal winter of 1950, over 120,000 Chinese soldiers launched a massive surprise offensive that completely encircled 30,000 UN troops, mostly US Marines, in the rugged mountains surrounding the Chosin Reservoir. The UN forces were outnumbered nearly 4-1, and temperatures plunged to a bone-chilling minus 30 degrees Fahrenheit, freezing weapon lubricants and causing rifles to jam. Rather than surrender, the 1st Marine Division began a grueling 78-mile fighting breakout down a single-lane dirt road winding through steep mountain passes. The Chinese forces occupied the high ground on both sides, launching constant nighttime ambushes. The escape almost failed entirely when Chinese forces blew up a vital concrete bridge spanning a deep chasm, trapping the vehicle convoy. In response, the U.S. Air Force used large parachutes to drop 8 massive 2-ton steel bridge spans directly into the gorge. Marine engineers assembled the bridge under fire, allowing the entire column to cross safely and reach the coast. The royal escape of Charles II. In 1651, during the English Civil War, King Charles II attempted to reclaim his throne by invading England with a Scottish army, but his forces were utterly crushed at the Battle of Worcester. Oliver Cromwell's forces immediately launched a massive nationwide manhunt, offering a life-changing fortune for his capture. Charles was exceptionally tall and easily recognizable, so he had to cut his long hair short, dirtied his face with soot to darken his skin, and dressed in the muddy clothes of a common woodsman. During his escape, parliamentarian soldiers came so close to finding him that the king was forced to spend an entire day hiding in the branches of a dense oak tree, watching through the leaves as patrol troops searched the ground directly beneath him. He traveled 600 miles south, adopting various disguises, eventually reaching the coast where a sympathetic merchant smuggled him onto a coal ship bound for France. Lauri Thorni's multi-nation flight. Lauri Thorni was a legendary Finnish soldier who fought against the Soviet Union during World War II. He was so effective at guerrilla warfare that the Soviet Red Army put a bounty of 3 million Finnish marks on his head. When Finland signed a peace treaty with the Soviets in 1944, Thorni refused to stop fighting and went to Germany to join the Waffen-SS to continue his war against the USSR. At the end of the war, he was captured by British troops in Germany. Refusing to sit in a prisoner of war camp, Thorni escaped and walked hundreds of miles back to Finland. Upon arrival, he was arrested by the Finnish state police under pressure from the Soviets and sentenced to 6 years in prison for treason. He escaped from prison twice, successfully making it across the border into Sweden using a fake identity. From Sweden, he boarded a cargo ship bound for Venezuela, jumped overboard near the coast of the United States, swam to the shore of the Gulf of Mexico, and eventually joined the U.S. Army under the name Lauri Thorni, becoming an elite Green Beret. Osama bin Laden at Tora Bora. In December 2001, following the September 11th attacks, U.S. forces and their Afghan allies tracked Osama bin Laden to Tora Bora, a massive cave complex hidden deep in the rugged White Mountains of eastern Afghanistan. The area was subjected to one of the most intense bombing campaigns in modern history, with U.S. aircraft dropping hundreds of precision-guided munitions, including massive bunker-buster bombs. Despite being completely surrounded and suffering from shrapnel wounds from an airstrike, bin Laden managed to coordinate a desperate escape plan. He used low-power tactical radios to intentionally broadcast fake orders to his fighters, creating a loud diversionary battle in one valley while he and a small group of bodyguards quietly slipped out through a different pass. They paid local tribal guides huge sums of money to lead them along treacherous, snow-covered mountain trails that were considered completely impassable by Western military planners. By the time U.S. Special Operations Forces cleared the cave network, bin Laden had crossed the border into Pakistan's tribal areas, escaping capture for another 10 years. Like and subscribe and leave suggestions for the future videos in the comments below.